Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military of a Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 15th of June of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first, we are going to talk about the Israeli-Iranian conflict, just a few words before we move further in the direction of Ukraine. During the previous 24 hours, the Israelis continue bombing and attacking the territory again, mainly the western part of the state, and as you can see according to icons, we haven't received almost anything from the eastern part of the state, which is also very important, and this shows us probably the real capabilities of Israeli forces. Another important thing is that today, during the previous 24 hours more precisely, the Iranians made their first very interesting statements regarding the situation. Iran ready to conclude agreement guaranteeing nuclear weapons absence, says Foreign Minister. He also added that Iran would stop striking Israel if it stopped attacking Iranian territory. So this is the first statement according to which we see that Iran is ready for negotiations and that Iran probably decided to stop this war, to stop these bombardments, because the situation is very critical. Another important statement was made by the President of the United States of America. Trump offers peace and threatens Iran with retaliation in case of attacks on US bases. So we talk a lot about the situation, and you know that some sources and some experts are saying that sooner or later the United States of America will join this operation, but some sources are saying that the United States of America will try to fix issue with Iran with Israel, just using Israeli hands. Another important statement was made by the Israeli authorities. The people of Iran should take to the streets and march for freedom. So this is very important statement, and this is not the first time when we see something like this from the Israeli side. For example, probably yesterday or the day before yesterday, at the beginning of this operation, the Prime Minister of Israel made almost the same statement, proposing and suggesting the Iranians to begin different protests or basically the revolution. And you know that by the end of the 15th of June of 2025, we start receiving reports that different groups of Iranians probably supported the Israeli operation, and they proposed their help to provide additional intelligence information, or they proposed some help on the ground or something like this. So now we are witnessing the beginning of the second phase of the Israeli special operation, and the main purpose of the second phase is to change the power, the authorities on the territory of Iran, and probably to cut this state for several pieces. At least we got a lot of updates and report from Israel about this. For example, we have reports that what from the Benjamin Netanyahu himself. What Iran has experienced so far is nothing compared to what it will have to endure in the coming days. Another important statement that was made by different sources. We hope Washington agrees with us that eliminating Iran's nuclear program requires toppling the regime. So this is another statement made by the Israeli authorities about the second phase of this operation. Now the Israelis are targeted on the top Iranian authorities. Basically, they want to replace them. They want to do the same as we saw on the territory of Syria, and probably Syria and Iran are not the final only countries that we're going to see something like this. But while all these political games, of course, both sides continue bombing and attacking each other. When talking about Israel, today we got a lot of videos of clashes. Today we got a lot of videos of explosions, fire anomalies to the south of the city of Tehran. Confirmed strike last night on the national Iranian oil company. Another video, another, let's say, fire anomalies we got to the northwest of the city of Tehran. Here we can see the same story. Another oil facility was destroyed as a result of aviation strike. We have a lot of strikes in the southern part of Iran, and according to information we have, the Israelis decided to destroy the gas storages of Iran, or probably to use this with the purpose to manipulate with Iran and to get better and stronger positions during possible negotiation process, which most likely is going to start very soon. We're not saying that about some agreement that is going to to be signed very soon, but talks usually starts very soon, and then they can last probably for ages before a final agreement is being signed. When talking about Iran, of course, they're also bombing and attacking the territory of Israel. We have lots of videos of explosions. We have some videos where we can see complete absence of Israeli air defense. And of course, we can see consequences of ballistic and hypersonic strikes on the territory of Israel itself. So, very difficult to say, telling the truth, for how long this war will last, how long it will take probably for Israel to change regime, or for how long it will take Iranians to restore their air defense and to stabilize the situation in their sky. Very difficult to say. It can take 1 to 3 days either for Israelis or for the Iranians, but also at the same time it can take months or even years. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but now let's talk about the situation in Ukraine, where the Russians continue their own offensive operation. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians carry out massive missile and drone strike on the territory of the oil facilities, Kremenchuk oil refinery plant. In this map, we can see the approximate routes of Russian attacks with drones and missiles. The Russians destroyed this oil facility, as we understand completely. We are talking about this territory. So we have fire anomalies. We have the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation report, where they're saying that they managed to destroy these facilities completely. And most likely this will lead to another crisis with energy systems in Ukraine. It's already just the beginning of summer, but obviously this attack will lead to unpredictable consequences in the late autumn or during the winter of 2025 and 2026. The Russians have begun their preparation for the summer, for the winter and autumn military campaign, which most likely will take place. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Sumy region. During the previous 24 hours, we had lots of updates from this area. The most important is that the Russians, according to information we have, answered the village of Mala Kachkarovka. This is already the second defense layer. You know that the Russians, during the previous days, were fighting just for the first defense layer. At some positions, the Russians managed to improve their let's say, lines. At some positions, the Russians were slowed down. And today we got first report that the Russians answered the second defense layer and that the village of Mala Karchakovka was taken by the Russians completely. If this information is true, then we can say that the Russians managed not just to answer the second defense layer, but to cut the second defense line at least in two pieces, the western one and the southern one. So this is approximately the border between two defense layer, between two parts of the second defense layer, and now the Russians most likely will try to handle with every single one separately. At the same time, the Russians continue their offensive operation in the village of Yunakivka. And during the previous 24 hours, several sources reported that the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. And currently, by the end of the 15th of June of 2025, the Russians secured up to 50% of the settlement, and the Russians continue their offensive operation. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians established complete FPV drone control over the main supply lines that go in the direction of Yunakivka, and everything that Ukrainians are trying to send in this direction is being discovered by the Russians and can be destroyed without any problems. So this is a probably very difficult situation, and it seems that the Russians managed to establish operational encirclement of Ukrainian contingent on the territory of Yunakivka. So we expect that due to this situation, very likely that Ukrainians would prefer to fall back in the very near future and upcoming days. At the same time, the Russians are increasing their pressure to the east of Yunakivka, trying to establish complete control over the village of Sadki and huge forest that surrounds this village from every single side. So this is another task for the Russians. If they can do this, then we believe that Ukrainians will not be able to hold their lines on the territory of Yunakivka itself. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kupyansk and in the serious directions. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the north of the village of Redkadob. The Russians managed to shorten their line the distance to the village of Novy Mir. This is the next village to the north in the Barova direction. As for now, this information was confirmed just by pro-Russian resources. The pro-Ukrainian resources, aid and neutral resources haven't confirmed this information yet. But when talking about this report, most likely the Russians have already established control over this territory, and the Russians are about to begin battle for the village of Novomir itself and for these two company strongholds. When talking about the Siversk direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians continued their offensive operation on the western flank of this offensive in the direction of the settlement of Serebryanka, and according to information we have, the Russians secured the most western part of Grigorovka, and according to information we have, the Russians continued their offensive operation on the southern flank of the Siversk offensive direction. When talking about this area, we have this video that was published by the Russian sources, and in this video we can see a Russian soldier, this is it, that managed to drop some grenade or some explosive on the position of the armored forces of Ukraine, and then there was very heavy explosion. This moment and this episode was geolocated, and this is exactly the stronghold that the Russians were clearing. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map, and now if you remember, we discussed that currently the Russians are focused to secure everything along this red line, because there is very important road that can be used by the Russians for the logistic purposes before the beginning of their major offensive operation in the direction of the city of Siversk itself. When talking about Siversk, during the previous 24 hours, we got this very interesting video. And in this video, we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking the most southern part of the settlement. We can see an episode of artillery duels between the Russians and the Ukrainians, but the most important is how exactly the Russians were bombing this part of the settlement. And it seems that it's not something like regular artillery strikes. It seems that this is something like probably artillery preparation before the beginning of their full-scale offensive. So based on this video, we came to the conclusion that maybe the Russians are planning to attack from the southeast of the city of Kupyansk in the upcoming days, which is very, very likely. Now let's move further, and let's talk about the Constantinovka direction. During the previous 24 hours, the main clashes, the main activities were coming from the village of Katerinovka. So the Russians established complete control over this territory. Now we see that the Ukrainians are trying to regroup themselves and to prepare themselves before the beginning of the battle for this pocket. The Russians are about to encircle this territory from the east, from the southwest, and from the west. The Ukrainians are trying to do everything themselves to regroup themselves to shorten the lines, but the Russians are getting closer and closer to the main supply line of 524, and most likely in upcoming days the Russians will be able to encircle these positions, and then we are going to talk about another cauldron to the south of Constantinovka. In the southwestern direction along N32 road, the Russians also continue their offensive operation, and today we got an important statement that was published by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation. Today the Russians reported that as a result of offensive, they managed to establish complete control over the village of Malinovka. If you remember, during the previous days, we received lots of updates from this area, and the most important is that we continue receiving different updates from this territory. We see that the Russians are not stopping, and every single day the Russians are trying to improve their positions. As for now, we understand that the main task of the Russians is to shorten the lines along this red line, and if the Russians are able to do this with minimal losses, most likely the Russians will continue. And the next settlement in this line is the settlement of Novoekonomichne. If the Russians are able to establish control over the settlement of Novoekonomichne, this is going to be the beginning of complete disaster and collapse of the entire Pokrovsk agglomeration. And something tells me that this is exactly what the Russians are trying to do right now. Now let's move further. As for the South Donetsk direction and the Dnipropetrovsk direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly on their way to the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. The Russians secured this dense network of the fortifications, the Ukrainians were forced to fall back, and we are waiting and we expect that during the upcoming night, the Ukrainians would be forced to abandon several more positions in this pocket with the purpose to maintain the lines and avoid the situation when they can be encircled, and the the Russians continue their offensive operation in the direction of Zaporizhzhia, Zirka, and Yalta. As for the previous 24 hours, we have this video where we can see how Russians were bombing and attacking the most eastern part of this village, and probably this is something like the beginning of artillery preparation, and most likely during this upcoming night between the 15th and the 16th of June, the Russians will make their first attempt to attack in the direction of Zaporizhzhia. As for now, this might be just a regular attempt to attack to test Ukrainian defense, and if the Russians are able to create something in this area, obviously they will continue. So we expect that during the next 3-4 days, this entire pocket could be taken by the Russians. Now let's discuss the situation in the Zaporizhzhia direction. As you can see, we have a lot of icons in this area. The most important is that during the previous night, the Russians attacked the city of Zaporizhzhia with artillery strikes, with aviation strikes, and whistle strikes, and drone strikes. So most likely the Russians were trying to destroy as many as possible warehouses, ammo depots, and fuel depots. And you know that everything is connected. So once again, this episode, this part of the video, we started with Russian attack on the Kremenchuk oil refinery, where most likely Ukrainians were storing fuel for their forces. We see the problems in the world with the prices for oil, where we see that the Russians attacked another energy facility object on the territory of Zaporizhzhia. So now we see that before something, the Russians are trying to reduce Ukrainian possibilities in their logistic, in their fuel, and so on. And at the same time, we got lots of icons from the Zaporizhzhia direction. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians, as a result of attacks during the previous 24 hours, managed to answer the southeastern part of Gulai Pole. So very likely that the next week the Russians will begin another offensive operation in the Zaporizhzhia direction with the purpose to take under complete control the cities of Gulai Pole and the city of Orekhov. If the Russians are able to take this first defense layer of the armored force of Ukraine, this can also lead to complete collapse of the entire defense and Ukrainian army in the southern directions, and they would be forced to take reserves from different directions with the purpose to stabilize the situation. But the most important question, whether the Ukrainians still have these resources. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.